Hey everyone. Okay, so now that you've been through all of the orientation and the things that I needed to get you situated with the class, now we're going to jump into our first chapter, chapter 1. And chapter 1 is really the foundational chapter for the course. And as I sit here in my backyard, and you'll hear lots of background noises, but I'm one of those people who believes in just being myself and keeping it real and natural. So if you hear any ums and buts and things, that's just part of the course. I'm not going to edit it all out because this is the way you get it, just as if I was in class. So I hope you appreciate that. Um, Anyhow, so chapter 1, let me just kind of explain to you sort of how I want you to sort of see it. Uh, it's sort of, I start by opening up with a lot of things that I want to expose you to get you to start questioning things. Because one of the things that I think is missing from the equation for a lot of these classes is the fact that they don't ask you enough of what you think. And a lot of what you will hear and see, particularly through the discussion sections and even through the readings, hopefully will incite you to want to think about some of these issues and why things are the way they are, and hopefully start to reevaluate or to evaluate for the first time your place in the world of that we live in, because every aspect of your life is political, from the clothes you wear to what you think about the things that are what you value, what you buy. All those things are political. And so politics is more than about government. Politics is about many other things as well. Politics is also about who gets when, what, how, and why. And in the context of power, that's really important to understand. Who has control or power? How do they gain power? Why do they want power? And what happens as a result of giving them power? And if you look at the world we're in today with all the protests, with COVID-19, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. And this is a time that I look back onto. It's similar to the civil rights movement days. And the only difference is there's not one leader. There are a group of people who are involved in challenging the issue of, do Black Lives Matter? But it's more than just about that. It's about, do all lives matter? Yes, the catalyst for change has been the continued killing of predominantly Black men and also even some Black women and children. But from that, that's just the beginning of a wider conversation that deals with racial inequality, social inequality for men, women, children, lesbian, gay, transgender, also the disabled, all the different groups who have been marginalized in our society and how we go about protecting them. And I can tell you that that's a very complicated story, but I look through the time that we're in right now and even through all the chaos and protest and think that there's great potential of change through this process. Yes, it's scary and sometimes it's tough to look at and deal with, but through this, hopefully we will come out and be better as a people. And hopefully we'll learn that there are things that we need to embrace in one another that are intricately important in the story of our country. So I will continue on from there. So as we go to our next slide, we will see the, so again, as I was mentioning before I got interrupted, and my apologies, Chapter 1 focuses on politics and citizenship. And in that, because it is the foundation of the class, it really is about your role as a citizen in the United States. And the idea of what it means to be a citizen and your responsibilities in that, like, for example, voting. Voting is part of being a citizen. They can't make you vote in this country, even though other countries can. The fact of the matter is, it's the way that we communicate with the government what our needs are. So the role of politics and citizenship and how we the people interact with that is what this chapter is about. And again, it sets up the framework for the entire rest of the chapters that we'll be moving forward into. So with that, we go into the question of what is politics? And as I said before, is who gets what, when, how, and why. And in that, it really discusses the context of the institutions of politics and the processes by how nations and governments govern. how they create policies, how the nations and regions and the nations and the states within them, and particularly in our country, how they interact with one another, the relationship and the power sharing between the federal government, meaning the national government, the state government, and the local governments, and who has power and authority over who at what point. And so we'll be looking at that a little bit later in the class. Um, but the main key to this is first understanding that, politics is the institutional framework for how nations govern. But then the next important component of that is the issue of power. And the definition of power, and I will give it to you as it says right here, is the ability to influence. It's the ability to influence you to either vote a certain way, to think a certain way, to act a certain way. And a lot of it today is done through social media, through television, through all the different mediums of communication that we have in our country are what drive this notion of what allows someone to be powerful, right? And how they are able to influence you. If they tell you that the best detergent is Tide, then, and you see it on TV, then quite innately, we as human beings will start to begin to believe that Tide is the best detergent. Now, it doesn't mean that Tide is the best detergent, really. It just means that they had enough money to go on TV and tell you that they have the best detergent. And so it's important to understand that context. And we'll go into in a moment, I'll show you the different types of power. And you'll see throughout the class that that is the foundation of the entire course, is this notion of power and how they go about subtly using it either to support you or against you as a people. Also, you can see here the government, which of course is the institutional body or the authority that governs over the people. But they do that because we agree to give them a certain amount of power over us. And we do that through what's called the social contract, which was written a long time ago or theorized by John Locke, and which he basically says that we the people basically have a gentleman or gentlewoman's handshake with the government that says that we will give you a certain amount of authority over us to rule over us in exchange for you to provide for us as people. And so the very essence of democracy and the social contract is in some form a basis of socialism because it's about the social protection of the people. Now, one of the things you're going to find in my class particularly is that I am very big about teaching you to be unafraid of words. And so when you hear words like socialism or communism, that you know they're just words and that we have to teach ourselves to not be afraid of words. Just because people will call themselves something doesn't mean they act that way. So, for example, one of the most repressive regimes during the Cold War period, meaning the period after World War II up until like 1990 approximately, was the German Democratic Republic. So it called itself the Democratic Republic, but it was not at all the case. Just because you say you're something doesn't mean you act in that way, shape, or form. So we have to be very careful about those things. Again, the framework, the institutions, and the organizations inside of government are how the government utilizes or uses power inside of our country. Now, with that, let's dive into a little bit of the context of what we talk about in regard to power. So, as I said, power is the ability to influence. Well, there's 4 different types of power that we consider when we talk about power, theoretically. The first is called force, and force is the physical use of power. For example, if we're having a disagreement and I'm country A and you're country B, and I want you to do what I want you to do, and I'm more powerful than you, I just fly my drones over your head and tell you to do what I want you to do, or I bring my fancy tanks or my big fancy guns and point them at you and tell you if you don't do this, then I'm going to kill you. Well, that's the type of influence, right? I'm influencing you by utilizing physical danger. Now, there's also a non-physical force, and it's psychological, and that's terrorism. Terrorism is not the physical use. You don't have to blow up things. You can threaten to blow up things, and the psychological effect of that can still have the same result as if you use physical force. So if I can alter your behavior, so for example, if there was an issue where I called the school, or some bad guy, not me, if some bad guy called the school and said, hey, we're going to blow up the classroom that you guys are in, they don't have to really blow up the classroom, but they certainly have made sure that all of us got out of the class, right? So that's a psychological influence of without doing anything physical. Okay, so that's the first type of power. The second type is called persuasion. And persuasion basically is when they try to provide information to you to persuade you to a particular issue, to vote a certain way or for a certain individual. But they usually do this by telling you all the facts. They give you all the information and then they say, okay, here's all the information. Now make a decision. Um, the third, which is the most insidious but also the most used, is manipulation. And this is basically when it's sort of like persuasion, but the difference is they conceal certain information to make sure that they get you to think about the issue a certain way. So if they want you to vote for something, they will leave out information that pushes you to vote for something that normally you wouldn't vote for. And unless you bother to look yourself, which they know most of you won't, then you'll vote for things that you might think really are good for you that really are not good for you. And that they use this quite a bit today, manipulation of information, which is unfortunate. And we've heard a lot when they talk about, the government talks about fake news, which, by the way, is not always fake news. It's just that by saying that, it makes you think that half the news that you hear is fake, so that they can now change your mindset about issues that really are true simply because they have now told you that it's fake news, even though it's not. And so you would have to do your due diligence to verify whether it's fake or not. The next type is called exchange. And exchange is like, basically it's diplomacy. It's basically like I give you something, you give me something in return so we can avoid fighting each other. So like, for example, we agreed to get out of Vietnam and we de-escalate the Vietnam War. Or the Cuban Missile Crisis, we make a deal with the Soviets that we will get our missiles out of Turkey in exchange for their missiles out of Cuba. So that's what an exchange. It's kind of like a barter system. Okay? All right, I'm going to pause for a quick minute, give you a moment to digest this, and then I'll come back to the next page.